Hello, I'm Adam Simon, and I would like to talk to you today about Social Heroes, my game, and how I've been thinking about using games as APIs for social interaction. That is, using games as a mediating interface between the players while they're playing. All right, or not. So Social Heroes is a game that runs on top of Twitter, which we've already heard a little bit about tonight. Twitter is an online service that allows you to broadcast short pieces of text to people in lots of different ways. Players give each other points by tagging each other with keywords and then earning achievement awards based on different combinations of the tags that their friends have given them. The goal was to provide a framework for communication and identity construction within the context of a game. Now, every game does this to some extent, whether you're playing chess or tag or football or Wii Sports or Halo. You're engaging in a conversation with the game and with the other players. But I'm really interested in what happens when the game starts to address that conversation directly and really take aim at what's going on between the two players and draw that in to become a central part of the gameplay. So when I started thinking about that, games are very often metaphorically compared to software. There's the metaphor is that there's player input coming into the game processes something, and then you get output on the other side. But what happens when there's more than one player? Well, in software development, we have this concept of the application programming interface, or the API, which is a tiny bit of code that, or maybe not so tiny, but that lets one piece of software talk to other pieces of software into the outside world without regard for what's going on with that data, where it's coming from or where it's going, depending on how you're interfacing with it. So recently we've started to see applications developed that behave more like pure APIs and less like traditional software. And one of those, I think, is Twitter. Twitter has a website, but you can interface with Twitter in a lot of different ways, including from the website desktop applications, instant messenger, text messaging, or whatever. And you can also get output from Twitter in a lot of different ways because it's text-based. Pretty much, and because it's popular, pretty much any way that you can input text, send text through the network, you can get it through Twitter. I just read that 2 days ago you can now use the command line word processing tool Vi to Twitter, which is kind of ridiculous. I'm not sure why you would do that, but you can if you wanted to. So that's sort of how APIs work. And that's that's one of the reasons that attracted me to using Twitter as a platform for games, because I was looking for that same sort of interaction between users. But let me talk for a second about games and why I think games are a good way to look at the way that we relate to each other. Games are formal systems of rules, which make it possible for us to, over time, figure them out and master them and predict how they're going to behave, which is rather unlike the real world, because the real world is complicated and messy, and there are lots of variables and rules that we're not aware of. This is what makes games fun. There are lots of things that make games fun, but one of the attractions of games is that we can understand them and we can hold the entire system in our heads and become good at that. The way that we do that is by evaluating the game state. The game state is a snapshot of what's going on in a game at any given time. In a board game, the game state is usually represented by the pieces on the board and the location of those pieces. If you know the game of chess, you can walk up to a chess game in progress and pretty much tell how it's going. In field sports, for example, the game state is a combination of where the players are on the field and what the score is on the leaderboard. So that's game state. And it turns out that we actually treat everything else in the world in the same way. We create mental models for how we think about things and what's going on. Right now, you're probably all creating a mental model of what you think I'm going to say next. And I have a better idea of what that is, because I've been practicing it. But this idea of devising a theory, making a prediction, testing it, and then evaluating what happened is sort of central to the way that our brains work and the way that we survive. We mostly don't think about this explicitly. This is all stuff that happens implicitly when we're not really paying attention. There are some things that we do model a little more explicitly, and one of those happens to be our social situations. Evolutionarily, that was very important to us. Human beings are one of the few species that are really good at modeling each other's brains. And this is what enables us to actually have social relationships. So I'm seeing a parallel between game state and the way that we model games and the way that we model our social relationships, and I think that that's worth exploring. So one of the things that happens by lining those two things up is that those social relationships become even more explicit when you attach them onto a game. At least that's my theory. That by making it something that you're actively thinking about because you're playing the game, that you will be more actively thinking about your relationships with other people. So that's sort of the background of where I was coming from. I started out testing this with some paper prototypes, literally running around the floor with note cards and stickers and sticking stickers on people. I started out with the game mechanics of alliances and collection. And that was fun. We learned some things. I learned some things. Other people did probably too. Some of the things that worked really well were friend collection and tagging people was fun. And I really thought it was valuable that it was highly visible in the environment. I mean, we were at ITP where lots of things are highly visible, but it sort of took over the floor while we were playtesting this, which I thought was interesting because it got the attention of lots of people who weren't playing either and got them to think about what was going on. A few of the things that didn't work, most of these could be solved with simple technology, the reason that I didn't start with technology is that I didn't want the technology to get in the way of the people, and to get in the way of the people in the game or to get in the way of the people and each other. Which brings us back to social heroes and Twitter. So as I was saying before, it's all based on short text messages that you send through Twitter. Any way you want to interface with Twitter works just fine. And you get achievements based on different combinations. This is an example of John giving Heather a punk point, and then at the bottom, this is not a direct result of that, but at the bottom later, Heather earns the IT Pissed achievement. Which is for drunk ITP students, by the way. Another thing that's important to note is that that because of the way Twitter works, in contrast to the way Susan was describing using Twitter, in Social Heroes, everything is public. All of these things are happening both for other players to see and for anybody else who's on Twitter who is watching these people's Twitter feeds to see, which produces some interesting results and some interesting performative actions. This is what the Twitter website looks like. As I said, there's lots of ways to interface with Twitter. I personally never use the website, but this is the easiest way for me to show you what's going on. And like a blog, the oldest stuff is at the bottom and the newest stuff is at the top. So just keep that in mind as I'm throwing these examples up there. We started with 13 tags and 15 achievements that I just defined myself, just some very common things, and about 10 user testers. I originally intended the tags and achievements to be descriptive, so we have things like Rockstar, and there's like tags like Glamour tags and Punk. But of course, users always do different things than you intend them to do, and it was a game, so that changed a little over time. Just to give you an idea of what you're looking at. This is the syntax for how the game works. This is the sending player. This is Xana. That's the name all the way to the left. That's her Twitter username. This is her addressing this action to the game. This is the player who's receiving it. That's John D'Amatos. And this is the tag that she's tagging him with, in this case, the flirt tag, which has an interesting history of its own. Because when Xana tags John with a flirt tag, is she describing John as a flirt, which is what I had intended in the creation of that tag, or is she flirting with John? We don't really know. In the context of the game, as an outside observer, I'm not really sure. I have some context because I know both of these people, of course, but people have been using tags in both of those ways and in several other ways as well. Here's me using the Glamour tag rather than to describe Scott and Mike as as I myself had designed the game to work. I'm using it to invoke the quality of glamour. Before we gave a big presentation, it was a thing. We started seeing some interesting uses of language in the game. The most interesting thing to me was that very early on, within the second day, players started using the syntax for things that were not part of the game. So here's John, trying to tag himself with junk in the trunk, and then Daniel tagging John with scary user pick, and Corey tagging John with insane in the membrane. None of which are actual tags, of course. But they were being used for communication, obviously, relatively effectively. They just weren't part of the game. So that seemed like an obvious thing. So I incorporated the ability for players to buy tags in the game. They can trade their points for tags, and then once one player buys a tag into the game, everybody can start using it. And that was the thing that tipped it over into actually producing some really interesting interactions and making it really usable. The first thing that happened, of course, is that somebody tried to break it. And this is Mike buying a tag called points, which generates this wonderful message. Okay, you just bought points for 3 points. To start giving points, reply, obviously automated systems are ripe for this kind of linguistic hacking, but I thought this was great, and it would entertain me for an entire day. But I want to dig into some of the other things that are going on. This is an example of Scott trying to give Daniel rockstar points as a response to a real world action. Daniel had done Scott a favor, and so Scott, rather than actually text Daniel, I don't know, maybe he texted Daniel too, but he also Twittered and tried to give him a rockstar point. Now, as I mentioned earlier, rockstar is actually an achievement and not a tag. So he got a message back saying that's not a tag, but do you want to buy it? Because the system offers. So he did. He bought Rockstar. That gets announced publicly. That top line there is the public announcement. And then he tags Daniel with it. And then Daniel says, dude, Rockstar's an achievement, not a point. And Scott says, I don't care. Which is great. I love it. One more thing. And then a few minutes later, Heather comes in and tries to give herself a rockstar point. That doesn't work because she can't tag herself with anything. It's only other people tagging things. As Rob was sort of brought up in relation to Scott's project, I did the flip thing. This is all, you can't give yourself points for anything. You can only give points to other people. I was very interested in this concept of relational identity and how our identity is developed in the minds of other people, because that has a lot to do with the way that we socialize, as well as the way that we construct our personal identity. We do a lot to project our personal identity the way we would like it displayed out to other people, so they'll hopefully understand it and reflect it back to us. Now that's all very interesting. This is a game, obviously, and it's also very silly, but I think that providing that sort of playful atmosphere for excuse me, for these kinds of explorations is really what I was getting at, is that when we have space to do things with lower consequences, we can start to look at how those social phenomenon actually work. Okay, so that's one example of the way that the identity is working. Here's another one. So obviously people can't tag themselves with anything. So Daniel, rather than tagging himself, he buys the needs coffee tag, which still gets announced publicly. We know it's attributed to Daniel, but he can't give it to himself. That sort of independently of that, Jonathan goes on a crazy tagging thing and gives lots of points to lots of people within 1 minute, which prompts Corey to try to take away the needs coffee take a needs coffee point away from him. Which, once again, at the point that this happened, not part of the game. Users come up with all sorts of awesome ways to incorporate syntax. And actually, that was part of the text-based interface allows for a lot of playful exploration of how you can interact with the game. So he can't do that, but he doesn't really care because he got that message across anyway. Heather then chimes in and says, wait, we can buy tags, because she hadn't been paying attention apparently, which prompts Corey to give her a needs coffee point. So the needs coffee sort of comes full circle. It went through all of that to get to being used in the way that the system was designed for it to be used. But there's a lot of other meta communication that's going on, and that's actually the prime use of the game at this point is meta communication. I think it's really valuable. There's a lot of it going on, and actually that sort of communication of temporal state, which Twitter is very good at, being quantified down into really simple one-word descriptions, gives you a lot of information about people. And it gives you a lot of peripheral information about people where you don't have to actually read the whole thing. You see what's going on, and you see the one word, and it communicates a lot about that person's state and as it's being perceived by other people. So that's the game. There's a lot of, obviously this is one game. I've been thinking about the way that games sort of insert themselves between players in social ways for a long time. And there's a lot of other things that I would like to work on. But for now, this came up yesterday. I think I just got this achievement. Daniel just created a new achievement, MPS, which is 1 thesis paper, 1 thesis presentation, and 3 rockstar. And that's it. Thank you. Questions?
So have you officially opened it up now?
I am approved. It's not officially open because if I get more than about 100 or so people, I'm going to break Twitter servers. I have to do some coding to fix that. I know how to do it, I just haven't had time. Right now there are about 25 users, so it's increased a lot over the past week or so.
Is there some kind of leaderboard or something where I get to see?
Yes. No, there is. Well, okay. The way you can get your scores. There's a whole bunch of commands you can send to the system. You can get your score for yourself or for another player. You can get lists of tags. You can get lists of achievements. That's actually a big problem, and this is a problem that happens with a lot of games that cross that cross sort of the established ways that we do things. There's going to be there also there is a website. It's not very pretty right now, but you can see your score on it. I was very hesitant about the website. I don't want to put a lot of data on a website because that implies that you should be using it sitting at a computer. And right now, I use it on my computer, but I also play with it from my cell phone. I think that what it really needs is it's the same sort of thing. It needs an API that pushes that data out to lots of different places. I'm thinking about doing a web version that would work on an iPhone and maybe a Java version and then a dashboard widget, that sort of thing. And that's actually really important in the game state thing and the way that you hold the game in your head. But yes, that's an excellent point. Tom?
What about other public interfaces for it, billboards, etc.? I mean, not that I want to see social heroes on site.
Right.
What do you want to think?
You mean just in public places?
Yeah, essentially,
Yeah.
a comparison chart on.
Right. Yes, I think that it could work in a community like ITP. Once it starts getting pushed out into larger other social groups. I'm also, obviously 25 people, I'm really interested to see what happens when there are lots of different social groups using it. Right now there's about 2. So the cross-pollination will be interesting and something to manage. Matt Parker?
I thought it was interesting that you talked about at the beginning that how the formal restrictions and knowing the rules was really important in games, and that's why we like games. But the kind of fun and beauty of this came out of people breaking those rules and coming up with their own, and they're using the system. But also, if you do something that only allowed them to assign points or use language that was defined, use tags that you had defined, you wouldn't have had half the fun with it. It wouldn't have been as much interesting. So I find that kind of balance really interesting.
Yes, it is very interesting. I'm totally fascinated by it. Right.